Hello, I'm Tom Eidelman. Today is July 13th, 2009, and I'm going to talk about the GMAC bonds. Now, what on earth are we doing buying GMAC bonds in the heart of the credit crisis? That is a very fair question, one that we even asked ourselves when they were first presented to us. And so all I can do is kind of walk you through what we were thinking and why we thought, actually, after doing all our research, it was one of the best buys we've ever made. So, to take you back to the crisis, the General Motors was in extreme financial difficulty and on the verge of bankruptcy. A lot of the big financial institutions, particularly ones that needed a lot of short-term financing, were in deep trouble. And just about all high-yield bonds, anything with risk, were collapsing. So with this in mind, I remember a broker presented the GMAC bonds to us, and we were thinking, you got to be kidding me, we don't want to look at these. That sounds way too risky, but he kind of said, come on, you got to do it, and I think we took a quick cursory look at it and said, this is way too complicated. And the next day I read actually a newsletter by Marty Whitman of Third Avenue Value Fund. He's one of the best money managers out there, and he actually had just purchased some of these bonds and wrote up why he thought they were such a great purchase. So between the two of them, I thought, maybe this is worth our time. Maybe all the fear has created an opportunity, and that's exactly what it was. It was actually an amazing opportunity that we sort of couldn't believe it once we got to the bottom of it. The story really goes like something like this. GMAC bonds. GMAC is General Motors Acceptance Corp. They are a auto financing company. They were part of General Motors originally, and then they were spun off and sold to a private equity division. But they issue loans on cars and dealerships, and they're actually backed, every loan they make, by the car themselves. So they are like a sort of secured debt. So the bonds that we were looking at were actually trading at 30 cents on the dollar, which is extremely key. So these are bonds that are currently paying and yielding 22%, and we're buying them for 30 cents on the dollar. So we looked into them, and again, underneath this is auto loans that are backed by cars, and we kind of did the math, and we went through each item line by line and said, okay, what is the worst possible thing that could happen to this company? They had a mortgage division called ResCap. We said, okay, this ResCap division, what happens if they go completely busted? What happens if people stop paying their auto loans? 3 times as many people stop paying as GMAC thinks they're going to pay. What happens if all these investments they've made in their securitizations, what if they all go to zero? What happens if all their hedges go bad? And what happens if they lose $2 billion extra that we're not even thinking about? Basically, we went through every scenario, and we figured out that even if they did go bankrupt and that all the worst case scenario happened, that these bonds were still worth 83 cents on the dollar. And I sort of walked through the math in my quarterly letter. And we thought, wait a minute, now this is the worst case scenario. What's the best case scenario? Well, of course, the best case scenario is that they survive and they turn it around and they actually return to profitability. And these bonds that are yielding 22% would trade like a normal bond and yield, which at the time high yield bonds were yielding like 15%. And if that happened, these bonds should kind of go immediately up into the upper 70s to trade with bonds in a similar range. So that was generally our thinking. We said, okay, the worst case scenario is they go bankrupt, and it takes a little bit of time, and over a year or two we get 80 something cents on the dollar. And in the best case, these bonds pay us 22% interest while we wait, and they go to 77 cents on the dollar. So these were quite a phenomenal bargain. If all you had to do was kind of look past the fact that a company with a similar name, General Motors, was about to go bankrupt, and you kind of had to avoid all these other headlines and all these other banks that were having some financial difficulty. But we thought the GMAC bonds were a heck of a buy.